Hi everyone, welcome to the Wednesday seminar series by the Migration Research Center at Koç University. For the last 2 years, we have been organizing these seminar series under the Broader project. Broader, the project titled Bridging the Migration and Urban Studies Nexus, is an EU-funded twinning project, which is a collaboration between Koç University, Pompeu Fabra University, and the University of Amsterdam. Today, we are excited to host Norma Schemschat from the University of Amsterdam and Rafik Arfaoui from Pompeu Fabra University as speakers. They are more than guests to us, actually, as we are partners and colleagues in the same project, the Broader project. Norma is a social geographer and urban sociologist currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam, and also affiliated with our Broader project. Her research focuses on refugee arrival in peripheral areas, concepts of belonging, and urban migration governance. Rafik is a geographer and urban planner, currently working as a postdoctoral researcher at Pompeu Fabra University, also within our Broader project. His research focuses on the intersection of territorial and social transformations in small towns and rural areas, and the local reception dynamics of asylum seekers and refugees as well. And now Norma and Rafik will present their work, welcoming refugees outside large cities. Following their presentations, we will have a Q&A session. I would now like to give the floor to Norma and Rafik.
Thank you so much, Pelin, for the kind introduction. Thanks also for the opportunity to present our work here today. You already kindly introduced us, so I will skip that and jump into sharing my screen and our presentation right away. Let me share. Practice that. So let's see. Do let me know if you see the presentation well. Does it move? It moves. Okay, this is good. So yeah, thanks again for the for our presentation, the introduction. Thanks for allowing us to be part of this. It's always exciting, and especially also a little bit, bit of an honor to present alongside such interesting guests that are here every Wednesday. Our presentation is titled Welcoming Refugees Outside Large Cities Between Territorial Fragility and Rural Cosmopolitanism. And our presentation today is based on Rafik's and my research on arrival of asylum seekers, their lived experiences of, asylum seekers and refugees that participate in the French dispersal scheme. So individuals that arrive in areas that are genuinely not considered, bustling metropoles, but rather, peripheral regions. And we will get into that a little later. In specific, the presentation today is built on a paper that we've been writing together. So meeting within the Broader project also allowed us to reflect further and, exchange about our previous work. While, being influenced with all the stuff happening within the project, and we wrote something up, and luckily that's something, this paper got accepted in a special issue that will soon be published. And since the paper is written in French, we're really excited to present the findings in English to a more international audience here today. So all this just a little bit to sort of introduce where we are coming from with that research, right? The presentation will be structured in different steps. I will start with a short introduction to set the scene. So French context, to explain a little bit more what are the contextual specifics. We'll then dive a little bit into the literature. Our broader research questions. Rafik will take over with presenting our methodological approach and the first set, case study selection important, and first set of results. I'll then jump in for the second part of the results, and Rafik will close the presentation with some concluding remarks and an outlook. So let's just start with a set of maps, setting the scene. And we see three maps of France over time. what you see here, what is visualized, is a crucial and visible increase in the role of non-metropolitan territories in the French arrival geography. Just to explain, green dots represent weakly or very weakly populated accommodation sites, while yellow and orange ones, the medium densely or very densely populated ones. And as we can see, while in 1999, reception took place predominantly in medium densely populated and densely populated places, over time, and especially with 2017 and well into 2019, non-metropolitan spaces became increasingly important in the arrival geography of France. Equally important for the French context is an immigration law reform in 2018, as a consequence of which the administrative procedures for seeking asylum were sped up. That resulted in limited capacities within state-mandated organizations that are mandated by the French state to manage arrival, which in turn led then to also an increasing role of local actors. And this is really where we jump in with this paper. We thus see an increasing role of non-metropolitan areas with the reform, and also a chronic incapacity to house refugees. We see an increasing role of local actors. And all this feeds into these contextual factors play a crucial role in our analysis of local solidarity within these regions, right? And just a little side note, as you can see here in the graph to the right, it is quite surprising to learn that there is an incapacity to house refugees when we look at France, which on average has accepted less refugees, less asylum seekers than, you know, the EU average, at least from 2015, between 2015 and 2017. So this is another also political element that flies into the contextual factors of our analysis, because here, just as a little, you know, kind of taking this out before, many of our interview respondents also referred to the national stance towards immigration as so-called politique de non-accueil, so an unwelcoming stance towards refugees, which again feeds into the importance of local action. When we take a step back from the context and look into the literature, generally non-metropolitan spaces underwent a significant diversification in the last 50 plus years. So it's not a new phenomenon, is what we're trying to say here. In France, literature on non-metropolitan places is really quite rich. And the so-called rural renaissance was already discussed by geographers there in the 70s. Other geographers, such as Frédéric Richard, discuss phenomena such as rural gentrification, also in connection with international migration, in his case, in the context of British migration to rural France. Yet other authors look into, you know, an increasing diversification of non-metropolitan places, rural spaces, but also villages. And so this literature really challenges the notion that rural spaces and small towns are disconnected from international migration flows. And in line, stepping a bit out of France, but staying connected with this effort within the research, there's really a growing body of literature on the reception, on integration, and on integration processes of exiled people outside metropolitan areas, pretty much worldwide. So here, just one example is New Faces in New Places. It's a US context, but we see similar research in Germany and Spain, Portugal, Sweden a lot. So all this to say that there is a collective effort to sort of tackle that dichotomy of a diverse urban versus a homogeneous rural world, right? And all this, our paper speaks to all of that literature. We build on this previous knowledge. And what we did was we built on the concept of rural cosmopolitanism by Woods, which he defines as a hybridization and translation of various cultural affiliations to create new rural identities, and as a shared sense of tolerance, openness, conviviality that embraces diversity, and a notion that he really understands to be connected to placemaking. So all that said, it is also important to note that places outside metropoles, it's a huge, vast category that really is within the literature, is also debated and discussed because it's diverse, it's multifaceted, right? Demographic and socioeconomic dynamics can vary greatly from one non-metropolitan space to another. You have prosperous places, you have left behind places, right? And the differences really include access to mobility, employment dynamics, demographic dynamics. And what we conceptualize as territorial fragility are really the spaces that are affected by what is generally referred to as decline, high unemployment rates, high vacancy rates in the housing stock, whether private or social, dense, weakly populated, negative downward trend in terms of population, so prevalence of outmigration. And all this just to show you here, we wanted to kind of exemplify that with one of our regions that were researched by Rafik in this case. It's the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region in France's southeast. And just for you to see, the darker blue, the area, the more fragile the area. And here what was being done is an overlapping of territorial fragility and asylum seeker reception. So we see in this map combined territorial characteristics plus reception type and amount of people welcomed. Green ones are group accommodations, which, as can be seen when looking closely, are quite prevalent in larger cities within these within the region, and dispersed, so-called dispersed accommodation, so accommodation across villages, across regions, in individual housing, which is quite common in the more rural parts. And regions like that in the literature also sometimes, I mentioned that term before, considered left behind. There was an author who was Rodriguez Pous, who spoke of the places that don't matter and that then start to revolt. So generally, this is to say they are not usually considered as welcoming places, but rather as places that are actually can be places where political discontent emerges. So what we wanted to know is how, which form do local solidarities take in these settings? We were curious to understand collective action linked to refugee arrival in relation to such territorial dynamics, right? We wanted to see if there is a rural cosmopolitan to be found in these places. If so, how it plays out, which action and what discourses around it can be identified. And really, we wanted to also feed into this idea of, or kind of challenge the idea of these places as necessarily exclusive and as rejecting asylum seekers. What is important to say at this stage, and then I give over to Rafik, is what we analyzed are three interconnected elements that focus on the local context. So the actors involved and their motivations, the dynamics, and also discourses. We understand the local really as, you know, the physical environment of arrival, the local practices, local discourses together. And what is also important to say that these are captured in a given moment, you know, in time and space. So what we present today is really embedded in time and space of the time of our data collection, of the time, you know, the context in which our data collection took place. So may well be different today, and we will get to that a little later. But let me, for now, if I'm not mistaken, hand over to Rafik, who will present our methodology.
Great, thank you, Norma. Yeah, I would like just to take a few seconds also to say thank you to Pelin and so all of our colleagues from Koç University for this Wednesday webinar series. I'm super glad to be there today. And so um, after what has been presented by Norma, so the context and our main question, I would like just maybe a little bit briefly to say that, of course, as has highlighted by Norma, we had two different research, but at the same time, I mean, in two different regions characterized by fragility and in regions that are presented as left behind sometimes. And so but at the same time, we had a quite similar methods. I mean, we identified three main, I would say, actors, such as the volunteers or activists that are acting at the local level, and also institutional and associative actors. It could be mayors mainly, but also it could be local NGOs or collectives that are working and acting with the asylum seekers, but also asylum seekers themselves are actors. But today we will focus on the activist and institutional and associative actors. And we used mainly semi-structured interviews and related to what we are talking today and our paper that Norma, I mean, introduced a little bit. We did 36 semi-structured interviews. We did also observations, and it's quite interesting to do observations in these areas because, as you know, probably there is this social proximity that it's quite interesting also to observe the sociability, the social interactions in the public space. We did also biographical analysis within the activists also to observe how they use their background in their local commitment today, but also spatial analysis that has already been presented a little bit by Norma within the different maps. And to maybe move to the other slide. I will briefly present our regions of study. I mean, starting from the department of Puy-de-Dôme, I mean, in the region that Norma talked a little bit on, which is Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes in the southeast of France. This territory is called Ambert territory. Ambert is a small town and surrounded by small villages. As you can see, so the accommodations and the center of accommodations is managed so by a state-mandated organization that is locally rooted for managing, of course, the arrival of asylum seekers. I would like to maybe highlight the fact that this organization is, which is called, I mean, it's not an organization that is specialized in the reception of asylum seekers at the beginning. So the mayors of the four municipalities, because the center of accommodation is organized in scattered housing and distributed across four localities called Ambert, Caen, Saint-Amand-Savine, and Arlon. The four mayors, even they don't have any legal power of decision, convinced the state representative at the department level to pay attention on the belonging of the local organization who have to manage the arrival, with the objective, according to the mayors, to ensure a successful reception. So it was super important in the decision to attributing the management to this local organization. The organization of accommodation also is related to the disponibility of the flats in the territory and participates also at the same time within these four localities to a second dispersal at the local level at this time, based on demographic criteria. For instance, the municipality of Saint-Amand-Savine insisted to welcome families with children to ensure that the class school that was closed the year before due to a low number of primary school students, we observe there a kind of utilitarian approach. So the municipalities, also quite interesting, are managed by divergent political parties, left and right wings at the same time. And we are in a rural industrial area that is affected by demographic decline. As you can see in the next slide in this table, the four municipalities, which is quite interesting, in the demographic development between 2013 and 2019, you have just to observe that the Center of Accommodation was created in 2015. So the asylum seekers that were accommodated were also in this census. So even that, you can observe that mainly from the four municipalities were registering a demographic decline. So moving to the other region of study, the Nièvre department that was also, of course, investigated by Norma, is predominantly rural with some post-industrial pockets. So located in the so-called, in France, diagonale des faibles densités, it means like a great territory with low demographic density coming from the northeast to the southwest, schematically, of France. The population density is below the average. And politically, which is quite interesting, the department used to be a socialist stronghold, but austerity measures may have played into the slow political shift in the region. So Nevers is the department seat and also the site, and it's in that sense is quite similar to the previous also region of study, and also is the site from where state mandated migration management is coordinated. The city has faced demographic and economic decline since the 1970s and lost almost 30% of its population. So as we can maybe observe in the next slide, is that the arrival infrastructures in the Nièvre region are dispersed across the department. In this, we can see an overview in this graph of the main accommodation sites, including 161 available places in 2020 in Nevers, the department seat, and 88 and 85 in Charité-sur-Loire, and this is respectively 60 in Luzy and 55 in Clamcy. It is worthy considering the numbers of inhabitants that Luzy accommodates the largest share with 3 available places for 100 residents. So arrival infrastructures there consist of a mix of a state mandated associative work, as we saw also in the other region, and a bottom-up action by residents. And it's quite interesting also to see that local inhabitants are involved completely in this arrival at the local level in the different towns across the region. So maybe after presenting these 2 regions, I would like to move to the results. I maybe give you a first step of results. So first of all, talking on the multi-faceted solidarity outside metropolises, and this picture, by the way, this photo has been taken in the small town Ambert, while an important residence to accommodate, but also a solidarity place with asylum seekers were opened. So the question here is, first of all, who is committed in this arrival and why are they involved? So in our study areas, individuals supporting refugees display varied demographic and socioeconomic profiles, so patterns stand out. So the majority are aged 60 years old or over, and either retired or nearly retirement, enabling them, this is important, to give time, or in another sense, to be more dedicated to the arrival engagement. So nearly all respondents of our case studies belong to intermediate or higher socio-professional categories. So I have to say that in these territories that they are overrepresented, likely influenced by, of course, our snowball sampling method, but also many emphasized prior experience in the social sphere, as we say, particularly education. For instance, former professors as a foundation for current volunteer activities, like, for instance, teaching French, which is not insured by the state-mandated organization. I would say also that in the territory of Humbert, and this is quite different between maybe the case that was investigated by Norma and by mine. So in the territory of Humbert, more than half have lived abroad and are new country dwellers. So they don't have the same belonging to the territory, such as in the territory that was investigated by Norma in Nevers, where the activists were deeply rooted in the region as long-term inhabitants. So, given said that, so we can move to the other slide, and saying maybe that all of these profiles that are different gives to the activist capitals, spatial capitals by, living abroad, symbolic capital by religious convictions, political motivations, but also cultural capitals. All of these capitals are, of course, highlighted as a factor of commitment, but also are reused in the commitment today. I would like maybe to highlight the profile, a short profile of Catherine, who is volunteering in the territory of Humbert. So Catherine's trajectory is quite interesting because reflects a profound connection to Middle Eastern culture, sparked at 18 by her discovery of Oriental dance during a trip to Egypt. This passion led to nearly a decade in Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Palestine, where she deepened her cultural ties. Married to an Egyptian and the mother of two, her journey later brought her to Chile, where personal challenges prompted her return to France. So, since 2016, after the opening of the Center of Accommodation Humbert, Catherine has dedicated herself to refugee support, leveraging her Arabic fluency and regional knowledge to bridge cultural divides and foster integration. She believes her knowledge of the Middle East and her ability to speak Arabic allow her to serve as a bridge between refugees and the local community. And it was interesting to see that she was more committed within the Syrian refugees, for instance, than other refugees. So we can see here that her spatial capital, for instance, or cultural capital, was reused. But what is quite interesting, that all of these capitals are quite connected and complementary, and make a complementary of commitment factors and strategies that is also helped by the sociability that is observed at the rural area, which is sociability based also on proximity. So moving to the going from this reflection on the profiles, on the capitals of the people committed, we can see, which is quite interesting, a part of our result, in rural areas, at the end, pre-existing local networks of associations catering to vulnerable population, for instance, disabled population, but also immigrant women, etc., became foundational for supporting refugees post-2015. So these networks coordinated with, or sometimes also opposed to, municipal actors and social workers to address material, social, but also linguistic needs, adapting local existing structures for a new population. So this solidarity occasionally led to specific spaces advocating for refugees' housing, education, and employment while challenging systemic exclusion and exploitation. I would like to highlight maybe two small cases. On the right side, you can see in this picture, so it's a key example including the residence called L'Élégante in Ambert, a semi-public space established in 2017 to accommodate, but also it's presented like that, to protect the rejected asylum seekers. So L'Élégante residence is located in a small street in the center of this small town, a town characterized by high rate of commercial vacancy. So this residence is divided in two distinct sections: a public space open for events, including, as you can see here, some announcement, including debates on topics such as ecology, feminism, yellow jackets, etc. in France, as well as solidarity initiatives. Artworks also by local artists are also sold to support these activities. And then you have a private space that is not, of course, represented here because due to the, of course, the need to protect this intimity, is also reserved for residents offering accommodations. So this dual structure reflects the residence's commitment to fostering solidarity and self-sustainability while integrating residents into local social and economic life. And on the left side, the case in Nevers is also similar, of Café Charbon, a cultural hub linked to the region's industrial past, provided opportunities for refugees to engage and integrate before its temporary closure. So moving from this, what is quite important maybe to highlight is, and we can see it in the next slide in these 4 pictures. So to fund the solidarity activities, cultural events are organized. The case of the Territorial of Ambert is quite interesting. The selection of, for instance, here is was a concert of music organized, and there are plenty of music organized in these rural spaces. And you can see here, for instance, this group called the Copicants, which is from Lyon, quite interesting, by the way, group. The selection of the punk music group is deliberate, as punk is historically, for the organizers, associated with demands for political and social change. These bands, often from major cities, participate due to personal connection with one of the event coordinators who previously lived in urban areas before relocating to the region. So actively engaged in counter-cultural initiative and migrant support before, this coordinator facilitates these collaborations. So you can see also, we cannot read it super well, but I mean, the entry fees and refreshments, for instance, operate on a pay what you want basis, reflecting a fundamental principle for organizers seeking to promote an anti-capitalist narrative through their actions. They presented at least like that. Notably, these events attract a diverse audience, including individuals with thought-aligned political convictions, alongside local officials, social workers, activists, but also, curiously, just curious residents that are coming there, which is quite interesting. So I will let Norma maybe to move a little bit to the other part of the result, then to come back and maybe to discuss all of these results within our main question, which is the rural cosmopolitanism.
Exactly. So moving on, and I will try to speed this part up a little bit, moving on to a third set of findings based on the discourse analysis. So we title it here Narratives and Conflictualities. Our analysis really allowed to reveal the varying local discourses across the cases, but also across actors. Interestingly also, and this is what I'd like to focus on here, also differences within actor types. So for example, even within state-mandated organizations, you would have varying, varying and at times conflicting narratives on how to approach welcoming newcomers in the specific territory. So while some actors followed humanitarian narratives, Others emphasized a rather pragmatic approach, highlighting, for example, the need to attract populations in regions that have been facing long-term demographic decline. And I think, again, this prompts reflections on how the emergence of rural cosmopolitan also always must be understood in close connection with material local conditions in the territory. So demographic fragility, vacant properties, transportation issues, etc. We really found that all these elements of territorial fragility feed into how local actors speak about, think about, and act upon welcoming newcomers. And finally, we also found in both cases that the arts, and I mean, Rafik spoke at length about this just now, how artistic expression, artistic events really were used as means to shape local discourses of welcoming. So what the analysis of discourses showed was that local engagement isn't without, and I mentioned that, controversy or criticism. The primary critique revolved around social work, its objectives and limitations. For example, while Ancrage, so in Nevers, the state-mandated organization in charge of economic integration, but also psychological support, maintains regular contact with rather, let's say, activist organizations such as the CIMAD, which is a national organization with local chapters that provides legal support, but also really coordinates all kinds of support to newcomers with and without papers. One of Ancrage, and here's I'd like to quote, says about the interaction between these, and here I cite, regarding the staunchly activist stance of rejecting state decisions, it can be understood intellectually. I mean, people are here, they remain here, it's their right to be here, but for me, yeah, that's one position, why not? Yet it's not my job, and that's why it's valuable to engage with other associations and mobilize resources. And here you already sense a rather pragmatic, I do my job and this is as far as my work goes approach. He continues in the citation. So we work with the CIMAD, so the aforementioned rather activist organization, but also with a Catholic association that solely focuses on housing asylum seekers whose applications have been rejected, very grassroots, and overall it functions quite well. So the cooperation, even though we have very different positions, since so Ancrage, we are state operators, and CIMAD has generally chosen to become an increasingly activist organization. And I chose this citation because it really shows the conflictualities, but that are sometimes very productive as well. In these fragile territories, different actors with different objectives still manage to work together despite opposing views. And I'm not saying this or describing this in a romanticizing way, but it's really the conflictualities are evident, they are open, they can be very strong, and yet out of a pragmatic need of making things work under fragile conditions, they sort of come together with certain points. He continues that, and here I quote, there'll always be disagreements about the activist dimension of social work and differences among colleagues on how to respect very restrictive legal frameworks. It is crucial to avoid excessive pessimism, but also naive optimism. In his view, I quote, I believe that good intentions alone are insufficient and can lead to undesirable outcomes. He acknowledges at the same time, the individuals we assist are dependent on us. Naturally, we want them to succeed. We recognize our responsibility. However, once we've completed our duties, I feel relatively at ease. So again, to just underline a bit the more the sort of limited or the unwillingness or lack of readiness to go a little bit further if individuals may need a little bit more. So another position is that of another state-mandated actor who said very clearly, and again, I quote, we're experiencing demographic decline, aren't we? So everyone has an interest. The departmental council, the municipality, everyone has an interest that these people stay. So while the first state-mandated actor was pretty much laid back in its approach and didn't quite didn't seem all too involved. We have a second one here, which is actually the director of local integration activities, who really tries to sort of emphasize local territorial fragility and how much actually these territories are also in need of new residents. And all this is to say that discourses vary greatly also among the actors. And then maybe to finish our results parts, another part of how efforts take place to really shift or improve local approaches and stances towards refugees are arts. Rafik, like I said, already pointed that out. There are efforts to shape local discourses on refugee arrival for the positive, very dominated by artistic expression. And here we have just one example of the Micro-Scène festival. It's a national festival that has local activities. For our interview participants in Nevers, it was a really important annual moment to actively, not just, and here's like there were three purposes: to actively raise awareness for the situation of newcomers, to enable recruitment of new individuals on events, and as Rafik already mentioned, to really gather funds for financing local solidarity. For example, when we went to the concert here, there were various residents we had talked to before that were engaged, that sold T-shirts, sold tickets. So all this fundraising is to support local activities. What's important to say is that the reference to art and local engagements in the places we studied are really also an expression of the rebellion against the legal administrative system that is often perceived as oppressive. In its engagement, it's also yet crucial to emphasize both that the contrasting profiles of the people involved and the means with which artistic expression, artistic expression takes place. Globally, though, we found that artistic expression allows for a reimagining of non-metropolitan places as actually spaces of contestation that are indeed capable of opening up to vulnerable populations despite their own potential vulnerability. And we can return to some of these elements. This was a rather short version. I'd like to give it back to Rafik, who will now present some core results before we can jump into.
Yeah, super briefly, before just giving the concluding remarks, I would like just to say that with Norma at the end of while writing this paper, we just asked the question that at the end, because we observed that this cosmopolitanism or like these local solidarities, etc., that is quite fragile. Like at least is this cosmopolitanism quite fragile? Why? I will maybe just keep a super short example on the case of Humbert that was presented already before. So in early 2019, so 4 years after the center was opening, the reception center faced a crisis with social workers resigning or taking, for instance, extended sick leave due to burnout. Why? Before this, they had proposed a centralizing operation in Humbert to reduce travel, improving recruitment, and save commuting time. But these suggestions were rejected by the local elected officials. As I said before, they don't have this legal power to decide, but also they are important because they are also in the center of accommodation boards of directors, which is quite interesting and not often the case. So this refusal from the local elected officials was tied to a utilitarian approach to asylum seeker reception, because, you know, as we highlighted before, so all of this balance between 4 municipalities will be broken. So that's why they refused. This tension, and this is important for our case, impacted coordination with, for instance, activists at l'Élégante that was presented, crucial for managing transitions of rejected asylum seekers from the center of accommodation to solidarity, places, etc. So despite these challenges, we do observe that rural cosmopolitanism persists, marked by cooperation between volunteers and state institutions to foster a welcoming image, as Norma spoke about it within these narratives, and counter anti-refugee biases. So, however, this rural cosmopolitanism remains quite fragile due to the fragility conditions of the arrival territories. So we can say that at the end, our discussion, I would say, paper, challenging prevailing narratives that, I mean, because due to the, for instance, the theory of urban gradient that was highlighted already by Norma, putting on the same scale density and diversity, we can see here rural spaces, even they are less dense, they are not less diverse, and they are not necessarily less progressive or receptive to migration included changes. Local solidarity efforts appear diverse yet complementary, and this is important due to the continuous diversification of rural areas. Territorial fragility also influences the local practices, as we highlighted already, either through constraints imposed on political leaders or in relation to the nature of required assistance. And we can see also, for instance, résidence élégante, café, charbon, etc., that also this arrival, this solidarity is also contributing to the transformation of the spatial environment of certain places. At the end, we see also, and it is quite interesting, sadly maybe interesting, I don't know, a rural cosmopolitanism that is weakened due to the political, social, spatial, and economic context. But also we would like to highlight within this also results and reflection that there is a continuous geography of change in these territories, and the actual reorientation of accommodation from fragile to dynamic spaces. And I would like maybe to highlight a new paper that I contributed with some colleagues that is interesting also, and it poses the question of what also this change would impact the rural cosmopolitanism that is raising in the rural spaces of arrival. So thank you for your attention, and we are ready with Norma for your questions and remarks.
Norma and Rafik. So we can
Thanks
now.
for listening.
Thank you very much. It was very informative and insightful. If you have any questions or comments, you can raise them now. You can write in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself to ask your questions or to make your comments.